Before we begin the video, please head on over to Patreon, linked in the description below, where you can help support the channel and request content to be made. Thank you very much.
And now, a passage from William Penn by George Hodges, from Chapter 6, The Settlement of Pennsylvania, Penn's First Visit to the Province. That Penn undertook the holy experiment without expectation or desire of profit appears not only in his conviction that he was thereby losing £16,000, but in his refusal to make his new estates a means of gain. He has offered great things, says James Claypole in a letter dated September 1681, £6,000 for a monopoly in trade, which he refused. He designs to do things equally between all parties, and I believe truly does aim more at justice and righteousness and spreading of truth than at his own particular gain. I would not abuse his love, said Penn, nor act unworthy of his providence, and so defile what came to me clean. No, let the Lord guide me by his wisdom, and preserve me to honor his name, and serve his truth and people, that an example and standard may be set up to the nations. So far removed was he from all self-seeking that he was even unwilling to have the colony bear his name. I chose New Wales, he says, recounting the action of the King's Council, being, as this, a pretty hilly country, but Penn being Welsh for head, as Pennanmore in Wales, and Penrith in Cumberland, and Penn in Buckinghamshire, the highest land in England. The king called this Pennsylvania, which is the high or head woodlands, for I proposed, when the secretary, a Welshman, refused to have it called New Wales, Sylvania, and they added Penn to it. And though I much opposed it, and went to the king to have it struck out and altered, he said it was passed, and he would take it upon him. Nor could 20 guineas move the under-secretary to vary the name, for I feared lest it should be looked on as a vanity in me, and not as a respect in the king, as it truly was to my father, whom he often mentions with praise. The charter gave the land to Penn as the king's tenant. He had power to make laws, though this power was to be exercised except in emergencies, with the advice, assent, and approbation of the freemen of the territory, and subject to the confirmation of the Privy Council. He was to appoint judges and other officers. He had the right to assess custom on goods laden and unladen for his own benefit, though he was to take care to do it reasonably, and with the advice of the assembly of free men. He was at the same time to be free from any tax or custom of the king, except by his own consent, or by the consent of his governor or assembly, or by an act of Parliament. He was not to maintain correspondence with any king or power at war with England, nor to make war against any king or power in amity with the same. If as many as 20 of his colonists should ask a minister from the Bishop of London, such minister was to be received without denial or molestation. The next important document to be prepared was the Constitution, or frame of government, and to the task of composing it, Penn gave a great amount of time and care. It was preceded by 2 statements of principles, the preface and the great fundamental. The preface declared the political policy of the proprietor. Government, he said, seems to me a part of religion itself, a thing sacred in its institution and end. As for the debate between monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy, I choose, he said, to solve the controversy with this small distinction, and it belongs to all 3. Any government is free to the people under it, whatever be the frame, where the laws rule, and the people are a party to those laws. His purpose, he says, is to establish the great end of all government, vis-a-vis, to support power in reverence with the people, and to secure the people from the abuse of power, that they may be free by their just obedience, and the magistrates honorable for their just administration. For liberty without obedience is confusion, and obedience without liberty is slavery. In a private letter written about the same time, Penn stated his political position in several concrete sentences which interpret these fine but rather vague pronouncements. For the matters of liberty and privilege, he wrote, I propose that which is extraordinary, and to leave myself and successors no power of doing mischief, that the will of one man may not hinder the good of an whole country. But to publish these things now and here as matters stand would not be wise. The great fundamental set forth the ecclesiastical policy of the founder. In reverence to God, the Father of light and spirits, the author as well as the object of all divine knowledge, faith, and workings, I do, for me and mine, declare and establish for the first fundamental of the government of my province, that every person that doth and shall reside there shall have and enjoy the free profession of his or her faith and exercise of worship towards God in such way and manner as every such person shall in conscience believe is most acceptable to God. These principles of civil and religious liberty constituted the holy experiment. They made the difference between Penn's colony and almost every other government then existing, in their influence and continuance, until at last they were incorporated in the Constitution of the United States. They are the chief contribution of William Penn to the progress of our institutions. All Europe with amazement saw the soul's high freedom trammeled by no law. The Constitution was drawn up in articles to the number of 24, and these were followed by 40 laws. The articles provided for a governor to be appointed by the proprietor, and for 2 legislative bodies, a provincial council and a general assembly. The provincial council was to consist of 72 members. Of these, a third were elected for 3 years, a third for 2, and a third for 1, so that by the end of the service of the first third, all would have a 3-year term, 24 going out and having their places filled each year. The business of the council was to prepare laws, to see that they were executed, and in general to provide for the good conduct of affairs. The General Assembly was to consist of 200 members to be chosen annually. They had no right to originate legislation, but were to pass upon all bills which had been enacted by the council, accepting or rejecting them by a vote of yea or nay. The laws enjoined that all persons who confessed the one almighty and eternal God to be the creator, upholder, and ruler of the world, and who held themselves obliged in conscience to live peaceably and justly in society, were in no ways to be molested for the religious persuasion and practice, nor to be compelled at any time to frequent any religious place or ministry whatever. All children of the age of 12 were to be taught some useful trade. All pleadings, processes, and records in the courts of law were to be as short as possible. The reformation of the offender was to be considered as a great part of the purpose of punishment. At a time when there were in England 200 offenses punishable by death, Penn reduced these capital crimes to 2, murder and treason. All prisons were to be made into workhouses. No oath was to be required. Drinking healths, selling rum to Indians, cursing and lying, fighting duels, playing cards, the pleasures of the theater, were all put under the ban together. Penn's provincial council suggested the Senate of the United States. As originally established, however, the disproportion of power between the upper and the lower house was so great as to cause much just dissatisfaction. The council was in effect a body of 72 governors. The assembly, which more directly represented the people, could consider no laws save those sent down to them by the council. The Constitution had to be changed. One of the good qualities of the Constitution was that it was possible to change it. It provided for the process of amendment. That customary article with which all constitutions now end appeared for the first time in Penn's frame of government. Another good quality of the Constitution was that it secured an abiding harmony between its fundamental statements and all further legislation. Penn was the first one to hit upon the foundation or first step in the true principle, now the universal law in the United States, that the unconstitutional law is void. Whatever help Penn may have had in the framing of this legislation from Algernon Sidney and other political friends, it is plain that the best part of it was his own, and that he wrote it not as a politician, but as a Quaker. It is an application of the Quaker principles of democracy and of religious liberty to the conditions of a commonwealth. From beginning to end, it is the work of a man whose supreme interest was religion. It is at the same time singularly free from the narrowness into which men of this earnest mind have often fallen. Religion, as Penn considered it, was not a matter of ordinances or rubrics. It was righteousness and fraternity and liberty of conscience. In this spirit he wrote a letter to the Indian inhabitants of his province. The great God, who is the power and wisdom that made you and me, incline your hearts to righteousness, love, and peace. This I send to assure you of my love, and to desire you to love my friends. And when the great God brings me among you, I intend to order all things in such a manner that we may all live in love and peace one with another, which I hope the great God will incline both me and you to do. I seek nothing but the honor of his name, and that we, who are his workmanship, may do that which is well-pleasing to him, so I rest in the love of God that made us. Now colonists began to seek this land of peace across the sea. 100 acres were promised for 40 shillings, with a quit rent of 1 shilling annually to the proprietor forever. In clearing the ground, care was to be taken to leave 1 acre of trees for every 5 acres cleared. All transactions with the Indians were to be held in the public market, and all differences between the white man and the red were to be settled by a jury of 6 planters and 6 Indians. Penn also counseled prospective colonists to consider the great inconveniences which they must of necessity endure, and hoped that those who went would have the permission, if not the good liking, of their near relations. There were already in the province some 2,000 people besides Indians, a peaceable and industrious folk, mostly Swedes and English. They had 6 meeting houses, the English settlers being Quakers. They lived along the banks of the Delaware. In the autumn of 1681, the ship Sarah and John brought the first of Penn's emigrants, and in December, the ship Bristol Factor added others. In 1682, Penn came himself. The journey at that time was both long and perilous. If it was accomplished in 2 months, the voyage was considered prosperous. To the ordinary dangers of the deep was added the terror of the smallpox. Scarcely a ship crossed without this dread passenger. William, accordingly, as one undertaking a desperate adventure, took a tender leave of his family. He wrote a letter whose counsels might guide them in case he never returned. My dear wife and children, he said, my love, which neither sea nor land nor death itself can extinguish or lessen towards you, most endearedly visits you with eternal embraces, and will abide with you forever. And may the God of my life watch over you and bless you and do you good in this world and forever. Be diligent, he advised his wife, in meetings for worship and business, and let meetings be kept once a day in the family to wait upon the Lord. And, my dearest, to make thy family matters easy to thee, divide thy time and be regular. It is easy and sweet. Cast up thy income, and see what it daily amounts to, and I beseech thee to live low and sparingly till my debts are paid. As for the children, they are to be bred up in the love of virtue, and that holy plain way of it which we have lived in, that the world in no part of it get into my family. They are to be carefully taught. For their learning, be liberal, spare no cost. Agriculture is especially in my eye. Let my children be husbandmen and housewives. It is industrious, healthy, honest, and of good example. They are to honor and obey their mother, to love not money nor the world, to be temperate in all things. If they come presently to be concerned in the government of Pennsylvania, I do charge you, their father wrote, before the Lord God and the holy angels, that you be lovely, diligent, and tender, fearing God, loving the people, and hating covetousness. Let justice have its impartial course, and the law free passage. Though to your loss, protect no man against it. For you are not above the law, but the law above you. Live the lives yourselves you would have the people live. Unhappily, of Julie's children, 7 in number, 4 died before their mother, and 1, the eldest son, Springett, shortly after. Springett inherited the devout spirit of his parents. His father wrote an affecting account of his pious death. Of the 2 remaining, William fell into ways of dissipation, and Letitia married a man whom her father disliked. Neither of them had any inheritance in Pennsylvania. Penn's ship, the Welcome, carried 100 passengers, most of them Quakers from his own neighborhood. A third part died of smallpox on the way. On the 24th of October, he sighted land. On the 27th, he arrived before Newcastle in Delaware. On the 28th, he landed. Here he formally received turf and twig, water and soil in token of his ownership. On the 29th, he entered Pennsylvania, adding 10 days to this date. To bring it into accord with our present calendar, we have November 8th as the day of his arrival in the province. The place was Upland, where there was a settlement already. The name was that day changed to Chester.